Vamos, amigo, siéntate.
Detente, amigo.
No, oigan, los demonios. Suéltenme, suéltenme.
¡Y suéltalo!
Oye, cállate, no tienes derecho a hablar.
Spyglass, habla Cobra 1, abrir Bravo Sur, cambio.
Campamento Rayos X.
She told us everything. Don't worry, I kept my word. She didn't suffer long. Here. You earned it. How's it feel to play the traitor? Give my regards to your boss when you get home.
December last year, a man used a rifle and meat cleaver to murder his entire family. In each case, the perpetrators were fathers. State police say this string of domestic homicides appears unrelated, though it could be part of a larger trend such as employment, child care, and other social issues facing the average family.
thought the SOP was an ID control system designed primarily to maintain order and control in battle. And we were right. But only partially. SOP had another function. To control people's senses. The nanomachines inside soldiers' bodies adapt to different conditions, promoting the release of neurotransmitters, hormones, and stimulants, giving them an edge in battle. They can create an artificial combat high by releasing endorphins at the same time a soldier kills an enemy. Or they can suppress hormones to neutralize the soldier's emotions, prevent them from panicking and engaging in friendly fire or needless massacres. It's all controlled by the system's core AI. It artificially controls the soldier's pain, emotion, senses, in other words, the essence of his being. The skyrocketing demands of the war economy have fueled the demand for more soldiers and more fighting. This in turn led to the development of technologies to rapidly improve their combat abilities and control their actions. The system ensures a steady supply of battle-optimized soldiers at a minimum of cost. But you, of all people, must understand, Snake, that unlike combat technique, a soldier's senses can't be taught. They must be earned through experience.
Does this have something to do with that test of yours?
The goal was to release the soldiers' nanomachines from the system, but we didn't know about the mental control.
And the nanomachines went berserk?
No. Our test was a success. At least it confirmed our hypothesis at the time. Just as we predicted, the nanomachines stopped functioning, and the PMC soldiers were freed from the grips of the system. But the moment the system stopped, all the pain and fury and sorrow, all the trauma and stress, all the hatred, regret, guilt, all the sensations that had been suppressed were unleashed within their hearts. Their memories, unlike their senses, weren't erased. Each enemy soldier they'd killed, each lost comrade, each threat of violence against the innocent, every act of war they'd committed was etched firmly in their hearts. In suppressing the user's mind, the nanomachines exact a heavy burden on his heart. The user's body rejects the nanomachines. This reaction must then be suppressed with drugs. Before the user knows it, his mind is in complete shambles. Snake. Remember Frank?
Frank Yeager. Gray Fox.
They twisted his body for their experiments and nullified his broken heart with nanomachines. SOP has taken it even further and applied it to living human beings. The sins of war these soldiers carried inside them returned to assault them in the form of unimaginable shell shock. The meaning in the system may have changed, but the battlefield hasn't. Until that point, war was like a game to them. And then suddenly, reality came crashing down.
I could do nothing but walk. And then, I saw me, walking in front of myself. But it wasn't really me. Watch out. The gap in the door. It's a separate reality. The only me is me. Are you sure the only you is you?
Does something like a self exist inside of you?
That which you call self serves as nothing more than a mask to cover your own being.
In this era of ready-made truths, self is just something used to preserve those positive emotions that you occasionally feel.
Another possibility is that self is a concept you conveniently borrowed under the logic that would endow you with some sense of strength.
That's crap!
Is it? Would you prefer that someone else tell you? All right then. Explain it to him.
Jack, you're simply the best. And you got there all by yourself.
Oh, what happened? Do you feel lost? Why not try a bit of soul searching?
Don't think you'll find anything, though.
Ironic that although self is something that you yourself fight, you seem to think that our plan is one of censorship.
Are you telling me it's not?
You're being silly. What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Create context?
I claimed you for my own and raised you as a soldier in the army of the devil. I am your foster father and your worst enemy.
Why?
Because I needed to know whether we were really someone else's creation. We're repeating history, Jack. Liquid and Solid hunted down Big Boss, trying to sever the tie that bound them to him. Unless you kill me and face your past, Jack, you will never escape. You'll stay in the endless loop, your own double helix.
Relevant responses to the situation at hand. It often manifests itself in soldiers under extreme battlefield stress.
You mean she's not having a good time out here?
I doubt it. I'm starting to wonder if she might not have some kind of deep-seated psychological trauma.
I was implanted with nanomachines, kept in a state of eternal sleep by JD and the proxy AI. They had me sealed away completely. Not only my physical body, but my will too. The technology was similar to what they used to restrain the B&B members you encountered. For me to wake again, the system had to be destroyed, one way or another.
I won't forgive you. Forever lies. Your pleading cries, but Susie knows you felt shit. Nowhere left for you. Nowhere left for you to run. Every fall right here in the open. Leave him alone, damn it! No! Alone with your skin splayed out from within. Once the monster has his fun. It's not too late. His mistakes needn't haunt you forever. He's just a kid, you son of a bitch. Though you have regret, you can't just forget. You alone decide your fate. Listen to me.
I saw a monster. I saw you.
Just calm down a minute and let me tell you what really happened.
You don't know how many strings I had to pull to get your transfer approved, to get you to my prison. The favors I had to call in, the sick things I had to do to get you under my watch.
You don't have to do this.
My father was a good man. He didn't believe in revenge. But I do.
I could do nothing but walk. And then I saw me walking in front of myself. But it wasn't really me. Watch out. The gap in the door. It's a separate reality. The only me is me. Are you sure the only you is you?
existía tal cosa. Ni siquiera había pensado en eso. Entonces, ¿cómo es que ella lo sabe todo? Verás, te diré mi teoría. Cuando fui internado, mi cerebro fue estudiado exhaustivamente con la excusa de la salud mental. Fui interrogado, pasado por rayos X, examinado a fondo. Después cogieron todos mis datos y los metieron en un ordenador donde crearon un modelo de mi mente. Sí. Usando ese modelo pudieron generar todos los pensamientos que yo podría tener quizá en los próximos 10 años, que luego filtraron a través de algún tipo de matriz de probabilidades para determinar todo lo que yo iba a hacer en ese periodo. Así que ella supo antes que yo que conduciría al ejército de los 12 monos a las páginas de la historia, porque ella sabe todo lo que voy a...
The mapping of the human genome was completed early this century. As a result, the evolutionary log of the human race lay open to us.
We started with genetic engineering, and in the end, we succeeded in digitizing life itself.
But there are things not covered by genetic information.
What do you mean?
Human memories, ideas, culture, history.
Genes don't contain any record of human history.
Is it something that should not be passed on? Should that information be left at the mercy of nature?
We've always kept records of our lives, through words, pictures, symbols, from tablets to books.
But not all the information was inherited by later generations. A small percentage of the whole was selected and processed, then passed on. Not unlike genes, really.
That's what...
The same conclusion again and again. Where is the flaw? All right, let's try something else. Commencing test. Understood. You're crossing a suspension bridge.
Is this my mission?
Yes, your destination is the other side. The bridge is wide enough for only one person to pass at a time. A man is approaching from the opposite side. He's carrying a gun.
I shoot him.
Suppose he's your husband.
I shoot him.
In self-defense?
Also, the dread dust that had infected us has ceased functioning. As a result, my personalities have merged into one. So I should be able to provide you with firmer guidance from here on.
Humanity. Every one of us has chosen the path of nuclear disarmament. Out of ethics or desire. Government policy. Military strategy. Whatever the reason. It's our path too. And each step forward makes it more solid. The patients have stabilized, but there's no telling how many will make it. The warhead we seized ruptured during transport. Recovering the leaked material exposed each of them to several hundred rads. Environmental contamination was kept to a minimum, thanks to their efforts. Heroes, every one of them. We finished dismantling the warhead. The nuclear material has been vitrified and sealed away. It'll take at least 30 years of cold storage before it's safe. And even then, we can't just dump it in the sea, bury it in the desert.
Once there was an explosion. A bang which gave rise to life as we know it. And then came the next explosion.